Hello and welcome to CATSweek. I'm Annalise Poorman. At its September 13th meeting, the Bloomington City Council heard an ordinance that would ban public right-of-way obstructions. City Clerk Nicole Bolden presented the ordinance.
Ordinance 2320 to amend Title 12 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Streets, Sidewalks, and Storm Sewers regarding establishing a new section 12.04.130 entitled Obstructing the Right-of-Way. Excuse me. The synopsis is as follows. Ordinance 2320 clarifies that placing obstructions within the public's right-of-way or otherwise obstructing the public's right-of-way is impermissible, and the ordinance defines the circumstances under which the right-of-way is considered to be obstructed.
City Attorney Mike Ruker explained some background and context behind the drafting of the ordinance, saying he believes this to be an issue of accessibility.
Ordinance 2320 defines the circumstances under which a street, sidewalk, or public right-of-way is considered obstructed. The ordinance states that a sidewalk, street, or right-of-way is obstructed if, number one, more than half its width is blocked at any point, number two, the normal flow of pedestrians or vehicles is disrupted, number three, pedestrians are compelled to step onto the street or otherwise expose themselves to danger in order to pass around the blockage, or number four, if it is rendered inaccessible to those protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. The four criteria in Ordinance 2320 set a reasonable measure for when the right-of-way is considered obstructed. Note also that Ordinance 2320 prioritizes education. The ordinance requires the city to give a member of the public an opportunity to adjust an obstruction so that it's compliant with Ordinance 2320 as a first step in every single case. Staff recommends that the Council pass Ordinance 2320. I appreciate the Council's consideration, and I'm happy to address any questions you may have to the best of my ability.
Councilmember Jim Sims asked whether the ordinance would include electric scooters in determining an obstruction of the public right-of-way. Ruker responded.
Certainly, scooters are covered by a far more explicit regime, and I think the number of conversations that have happened related to shared-use motorized scooters are extensive. So we've taken a lot of concrete measures just in the last couple of months to attempt to address those. You may have noticed downtown there are now 68 corrals in place between 3rd and 12th and I think Morton and Indiana Street to address the, to give a place for scooters to be placed specifically that's safe. This month, September, we sent a series of notices of violation to each of the scooter companies related to violations for illegally parked scooters. Lime received a notice of violation totaling $2,760, Bird totaling $2,220, VO Ride totaling $870. We have 3 temporary part-time employees whose job it is to go around to identify scooter violations and to remedy them. I think just a couple weeks ago during the Public Works budget presentation, Director Wason requested, and I think it was met with a positive reaction, the employment of 2 people full-time beginning in January to address scooter violations. So we're taking concrete measures on that front. We wouldn't look to Ordinance 2320 to set the standard for when a scooter is parked illegally. We have a far more specific ordinance that addresses that in Title IV.
During public comment, one local resident said he believes the legislation would negatively impact vulnerable populations in the community.
I, like many, I'm sensitive to the need for unfettered access to all of our public spaces. It's important to remember that critical component of what defines public is that it is non-exclusionary. And I think that this legislation, as it is written, is in fact exclusionary. I think it fails to provide adequate enforcement measures and clearly define them. It opens up additional policing of already vulnerable people without necessarily giving them an opportunity to access local resources. I think the legislation as is short-sighted to the nuance of the issue at hand. I think the issue is legitimate, and I think it bears some amount of response, but I think that there are resources out there from cities doing a better job than Indianapolis, frankly, and we as a city ought to study those resources and create a more informed potential solution to the issue that we seek to address. And really what this legislation needs is a clear nexus to services being offered and insured to resolve obstructions and not simply punitive measures, again, to people who are already the most vulnerable among us. Thank you.
Downtown Inc.'s Talisha Kopic said she supports the ordinance, saying she believes it would allow for greater accessibility in the downtown area.
We've got a very active downtown, and it's important to keep paths open for walkability of all ages and ADA accessibility. Pop-up obstructions on sidewalks can get out of control pretty quickly and affect the balance of multiple uses in the downtown area. You know, there's a whole group of people trying to keep things clean and picked up, and frankly, it gets very frustrating and a little bit overwhelming. And so anyway, all of us kind of working together for a clean and safe and maintained downtown is very important, and appreciate your consideration of this ordinance.
The ordinance failed by a vote 2 to 5 to 1. The Bloomington City Council will meet again on September 20th. On September 13th at the Monroe County Commissioners meeting, the 3 commissioners read a proclamation for Hispanic Heritage Month.
Whereas Hispanic Heritage Month is celebrated each year from September 15th to October 15th as a time to recognize and celebrate the many contributions, diverse cultures, and extensive histories of the American Latino community. The month also celebrates the Independence Days of several Latin American countries, including Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua on September 15th, Mexico on September 16th, and Chile on September 18th.
This year's theme is building prosperous and healthy communities, something which we strongly support. From the earliest days of our country, the United States has been enriched by the contributions of Hispanic writers, scientists, soldiers, doctors, nurses, caregivers, entrepreneurs, academics, and leaders. We wish to honor Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and other Latino activists who in 1962 led the effort to defend the rights of farm workers seeking better wages and working conditions.
And we celebrate Sonia Sotomayor, who in 2009 became the first Latina and only the 3rd woman to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. During Hispanic Heritage Month, we reaffirm our belief that diversity is one of our country's greatest strengths, and we seek to broaden that diversity in Monroe County. Now, therefore, we, the Monroe County Board of Commissioners, proclaim September 15th through October 15th, 2023 as Hispanic Heritage Month in Monroe County. Proclaimed this 13th day of September, 2023.
Next, Health Department Director Lori Kelly gave her department update.
The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices voted yesterday to approve the latest COVID vaccine for all those 6 months and older who choose to be vaccinated. The updated vaccine is targeting Omicron variants. The Indiana Department of Health will be providing flu shots and COVID rapid tests at the Bloomington Community Farmers Market this Saturday from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. COVID vaccines will not be available at this event as they were just recently approved.
Commissioner Julie Thomas asked about where residents can find data from the COVID-19 wastewater testing. Kelly responded.
The most recent data does show that the wastewater concentration levels are still trending upwards. The Indiana Department of Health on their main website has a dashboard, and I will be receiving information on a weekly basis from Dr. Greaves. That has not happened just quite yet. But I do anticipate that beginning in the next couple weeks. But for now, the Indiana Department of Health has all of that information available.
Also during department updates, Commissioner Penny Githens shared that the commissioners will hold 2 public listening sessions concerning the location of the corrections facility.
We have been listening to people with regard to the corrections campus that we're looking at and the location of where it might be. So we're going to hold 2 public listening sessions. The first on Wednesday, September the 20th at 6:30 p.m. at Summit Elementary School, and the second at 3 p.m. on September 24th at RCA Park. And these are open to the public. We will say a few words. We'll have other elected officials there with us as well, and we'll be inviting a number of others. And we want to hear from the community about the location of the jail.
During new business, County Attorney Jeff Cockrell asked the commissioners to help determine the Salt Creek Township Board membership after an additional board member was elected onto a 3-person board. Cockrell said that the board membership dilemma was a little convoluted and explained the intricacies of the situation.
The last election, there were 2 people who ran for the Salt Creek Township Board. They both won the election. That is a 3-member board. And so of those 3 members, the law allows for a holdover candidate to occur based upon, not electing enough. However, there were 2 people who had been eligible for the holdover election, Mr. Hogan and Mr.
Cunningham.
Mr. Guy Cunningham. I remember Guy. Mr. Cunningham were eligible for that holdover position. The statute indicates that the auditor is to give notice to the commissioners about the need to make a determination. That actual statute has a deadline of December 31st of the year. And that's where we were kind of getting confused. And so when we reached out the IDD, there is a second statute, Indiana Code 313-1120, that apparently this has happened before, where that election issue is not caught, and it says the commissioners don't lose their power if it fails to meet that December 31st date. I think the commissioners and the auditor were made aware of this a few weeks ago, and so we went ahead and held this and noticed this meeting to the commissioners. And so the question before you is, which of those 2, Mr. Hogan or Mr. Cunningham, you want to have as the holdover candidate? Now, if whoever you choose decides they don't want to do the job, or they can serve, or if they decide they don't want to serve, then they would resign, and then it would go through the normal caucus procedures as outlined in the statute, which we've had enough of those in the last few years. I think we're all familiar with.
Commissioner Penny Giffen suggested that they nominate Guy Cunningham.
I know that Trustee Joan Hall had reached out to Steve Hogan, who indicated he was not interested in serving. And so I would like to nominate Guy Cunningham as the holdover candidate, and then we can reach out to Mr. Cunningham to see if he's willing to step into the role again. I know that he served for many years as on the township board out in Salt Creek. So if we approve that and he decides not to assume the role, then we'll ask that a new person be caucused in.
The commissioners unanimously voted to nominate Guy Cunningham to the Salt Creek Township Board. The next Monroe County Commissioners meeting will be held on September 20th. On September 12th, at the Bloomington Board of Public Works meeting, the board heard a sidewalk closure request from Reed and Sons for the Bloomington Gateway project at Miller Showers Park. The closure request was for September 18th through December 8th, 2023. Engineering field specialist Alex Gray outlined the request.
Reed and Sons is working with the Parks Department for the Miller Showers Gateway project, and they are going to have a road closure on Old State Road 37, which is actually in between North Walnut and North College Avenue. It's the 2 through paths. That's the area of the closure. There will be a lane that's about 2 days that'll happen on, I forget the exact dates, but it's early in the timeline. I think it's like on the 20th or something. Yeah. And those will be on the west side, but it'll only be a lane of Old 37. There will not be any affecting to North Walnut or North College. Both of them will be open, and there will be sidewalk and bike lane closures and stuff too associated with it, but it's all toward the park area and will not affect College in them. And then the packet should have detour paths and everything.
Board President Kayla Cox-Deckard asked for clarification on how the Gateway project would improve the right-of-way and the sidewalks.
So we talked in the work session yesterday about the fact that this is in the corridor that has been recently studied. I appreciate we received the construction documentation that shows a little bit better the view of the
sidewalk path.
areas that are going to be impacted as far as improvements being made in the right-of-way to, roadway areas. So I'm still trying to get a handle on exactly what improvements are being made in the right-of-way. So the area, the old 37 segment, I think earlier I referred to it as a squished roundabout. I'm sure that's the technical engineering term. And then the sidewalk, it's my understanding that the sidewalk is in, with exception of the right-of-way proper, it's in the park.
Yes.
Like, it is not what we would think of as a sidewalk.
Yeah.
I guess I'm still trying to figure out if the sidewalk improvement is part of a public works managed
I know the main piece is more the
Parks and Recreation Operations and Development Division Director Tim Street explained that the Gateway project will help with the sidewalk connectivity in addition to adding the art installation.
So of course a big part of it is the art piece itself, but there are also associated improvements at that north end of Miller Showers Park. So part of that is sidewalk connectivity. That north end of the park is becoming an increasingly important connector as we see some densification, especially east of the park there, with the Verve and the future, I don't remember what it's called, development coming in though. So there's a crossing there. We're going to be adding a light to that crossing. It's missing a light right now. And then on the Gorley Pike crossover, or Old 37 crossover, depending on how you call that, whatever you want to call that, there's a pedestrian refuge island that's very beat up, that's been hit by all manner of trucks and has a lot of rough landscaping that grows at a height that makes it really hard to see through as well. So part of the project is revamping that pedestrian refuge island. It's going to rebuild some of the broken concrete, some of the broken curbs. Actually, a portion of the Gorley Pike crossover will be milled and resurfaced. That is why part of that will be closed. There'll be new PED detectable warnings on the curb ramps going to that pedestrian refuge and west to College. And then, as Alex mentioned, because of a missing section of sidewalk at Steak and Shake, there was no good way to have an MOT in place for a detour on the west side of the park there. And so we are able to fund that improvement from the Parks Bond as part of this project as well.
Board member Elizabeth Karen asked about the purpose of the closure. Street responded.
That would be the reason for the however many days, I forget they had in their closure of Gorley Pike when needed, when they're actively working there. When they're not, they'll have it open for traffic to go through. And then also for the pedestrian detour because of the sidewalks, which Kyla is correct. Some of them are maybe public right-of-way sidewalks, some of them are parks internal, but they all form one system that people use to transport through the area.
Cox Deckard asked Street about the cost of the project and how much the infrastructure improvements cost in comparison to the art piece. Street responded.
If I could just get a better understanding of the expense of the update and the elements that would be considered the public works related elements, that would be helpful. And it can be ballpark. I'm not asking for like detailed budgetary sheet, just wanted to have a better understanding that it's not that price is paying for a single piece of artwork. It's actually paying for a lot of this infrastructure, and I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Correct. As mentioned, yeah, there's various improvements to the north end, including removal of trees, replanting of trees, just improving the north end of the park in general. The contract with Bomar Industries, which is the special metal fabricator out of Beech Grove, Indiana, that's going to manufacture the actual art piece, I believe was right around $400,000. So the remaining balance would be the other public improvements.
During public comment, Bloomington resident David Ebbinghaus spoke in opposition to the art installation.
And I understand that you don't have any control or power over the selection or the manufacture of the so-called artwork, but this is a public forum and I would like to have my opinion made public. So I just read about this 2 days ago in the paper, and there was no mention there of the Jean-Paul Dario sculptures, which is right next to this area that you're talking about tonight. And I just wrote an article for The Writer. It's in the previous issue and the one that's out now about the artistic legacy of Jean-Paul Dario and this sculpture in particular. So I was very concerned that this tower would not dwarf in scale the Dario sculptures. They were put in the park in 1980 down in the bottom of the valley, and it was only in, I think, 2002 that it was finally, when the park was redone, put in its present position. And it's wonderful the way it is now. It's on a human scale. This tower that's being proposed is not on a human scale, and they're calling it an artwork, but it has, as an artist, I say, in my opinion, it has no artistic value. So I put it on my Facebook page asking people what they thought of it. I had nobody who was in favor of it, and many disparaging comments. And the opinion of the people that responded, I guess in my social group, the people I know and the people that read what I write, were not only against it, but were outraged. And they felt that there was no public transparency because most of them, and I also had only, what I had heard was that the Gateway project was going to be a sign over the Arlington Road pedestrian overpass. But then all of a sudden I read in the paper that it's a done deal, contracts have already been awarded. Supposedly they got advice, paid for advice, bad advice. So in any case, I want to make it known that this is going to have a terrible backlash.
Cox Deckard asked what has been the process of getting the public's input on the project. Street responded.
This whole project started long before I was with the city, so I can't speak to some of the early things that were done when this project kicked off in 2018, 2019, 2020. But I do know historically that at that point, the firm was secured to look at various different locations around town that could have the necessary land, the necessary use to put in different gateways, and different gateways were conceptualized at that time. And then when COVID hit, I think everything kind of was paused. And then things were revamped again in 2022. And at that time, a couple locations were looked at more seriously. One was the Arlington Bridge, I heard that mentioned, and the other was the very north end of Miller Showers Park because of its proximity to what I believe is the busiest intersection in town, where a lot of people come in and out of Bloomington. At that time, some more concepts were conceptualized, and then I believe it was in December of last year, they were shown to the Board of Park Commissioners. There was a public forum in the lobby of City Hall to showcase those, and they went onto the park's website for a number of weeks for people to comment and feedback on. And I know we did receive comments and feedback. I couldn't tell you the number of that right now. From there, Bloomington Arts Commission was also consulted for some feedback on that preliminary design. Some adjustments were made through early this year, and then the final result was arrived at.
Wason shared that the corridor study plans are still so unknown that city staff recommend approving the project that has already received funding.
We, as city staff, and talking with Andrew and others, are comfortable with the right-of-way improvements that are being made, given that the unknowns of the corridor study are that unknown. There are some really great short-term improvements here. There's some sidewalk connections, like the Steak and Shake one. So that part of it, from a right-of-way perspective in the future, is what we know.
The board unanimously voted to table the sidewalk closure request. The next Board of Public Works meeting will be held on September 26th. The Monroe County Justice Fiscal Advisory Committee met on Monday, September 11th. The main points discussed were the timeline of construction and the site selection. Councilmember Peter Iverson presented the upcoming phases of the timeline for the new jail.
Phase 3 is a facility program development. This is where we are going to be, we'll talk about this in a little bit in more depth, but 4 to 6 months to determine what activities are going to be taking place in the buildings that will be at the land that we eventually choose. Phase 4 is project management and implementation. This includes facility design and conceptual design. That'll take 6 to 12 months. Phase 5 is the design phase. That's where we'll be working with DLZ to work on schematic designs, design development, and construction documents. That'll take 8 to 12 months. Phase 6 is the bidding and negotiation for construction of the new facilities. This is the bids and the final go, no-go, and that'll take an estimated 2 to 4 months. The final phases, phase 7 is construction. That we're estimating is going to take 18 to 36 months. Phase 8 is then occupation and operation. That's when the sheriff and his team will finish up their punch list, finish up the furnishings, and then start moving people over into the new buildings, as well as any co-located apartments. And then phase 9 is post-occupancy. That's when the sheriff and his team will be fine-tuning their policies and procedures with the transition team, which you're going to talk about in a little bit, assess the operations, and ensure preventative maintenance. And that's another 6 to 9 month process.
Iverson then went on to talk about the steps being taken to assess the Thompson site, including environmental and geological studies that have yet to be published. During public comment, a resident who lives near the Thompson site shared that they felt that the committee was overlooking them.
I think it's really important that the surrounding neighborhoods are also considered stakeholders, and that our opinion and the effect on our lives that it will have be taken into consideration as well.
The meeting ended with a comment from Councilmember Jennifer Crossley addressing various points brought up throughout the meeting.
I am of the mindset that I do think that we have to figure out other alternatives to funding things to reduce recidivism instead of just building full steam Joe ahead. That is definitely something that is near and dear to me as well. Are we there yet? No. Do I definitely think we need to be there yet? Hell yeah. And so with that being said, I still welcome more community input, more emails for me to respond to, more conversations. I do know, and I really want to point that out as well, that, you know, for those that are interested in the Thompson site, we have not had a scheduled listening session. So there has been nothing behind the doors of that. When that does come out, we will definitely let everybody know and try to get that out to the masses. Because I do think that sometimes government and as electeds, we do think that other people think like us and they automatically know what's going on. And it's clear that folks have not. And so how do we do that? It's just getting the word out and spreading correct information instead of some of the misinformation that I've have seen.
Occupancy of the new jail is expected to occur in or around the spring of 2027. The next Monroe County Justice Fiscal Advisory Committee will be held on Monday, September 18th, 2023. And that is all for CATSweek. Thank you for joining us. For CATS and WFHB, I'm Annalise Poorman.